What we're going to do is, if you remember from the last session, we talked about getting into the Greek history a little bit. I'm going to ask questions as we go along, and I may ask you, may have to call on you if you don't volunteer. How's that sound? I want to get everybody involved, see what you know, what you remember from what we studied. But what you see in front of you right now is a chart, 16 feet long, and it's the history of the world from the creation way back here. There's Adam and Eve, okay? And way on the other end, it ends in 1878. The man who put this chart together did this in 1878. This is a color version of the chart. Very detailed, very good, and it makes for good studying. So I thought it would help you to have something to look at rather than just listen to me talk. You can kind of get the picture of how things were. And as I teach tonight, I'm going to use this pointer and refer to different places on the chart that will help you be able to understand different things going on in the world all at the same time. Okay? Now, way back here, the Tower of Babel. Remember talking about that? And way over here is the Persian Empire. You can see the picture of the city of Babylon here, or what is supposed to be Babylon. Does anybody remember how big that city was? It had 4 walls, of course. How long, what was the distance of each wall? Who remembers that? Nobody remembers. Sam? 15 miles, that's correct. 15 miles each way. So you had 15 miles by 15 miles by 15 miles by 15 miles. A very, very large city. Populated by about 1 million people, about the size of Milwaukee. So the city of Babylon way up here, and then a lot of battles, a lot of wars being fought in here, empires rising and falling. Do you remember the first empire? We'll have a little review tonight. There are 7 world empires. Okay? Actually, 6. The 7th really isn't of this world. You know what that one is, don't you? All right. Did you know there was always a one world government? Always one, until this event right here. Jesus dying on the cross for us. Since that time, there has never been a one world government. Until then, there's always one. After then, never one. Because the kingdom of God is established. And there can never be another one world government. Daniel 2:44, right? Okay, so the period of one world government starts way back here. They were trying to put one together at the Tower of Babel. They kept putting them together all the way up to the Roman Empire. And when Rome fell, and really it was the Lord Jesus that brought Rome down, the preaching of the gospel, destroyed the Roman Empire. When Rome fell, you never had another one world government. You never had another world empire. You almost have one today with the United Nations and all the things they're trying to do, but they have never been able to pull it off. Okay, who remembers the 6 world empires that existed? Sarah, do you know? You want me to give you a few little hints? The first one, what was it? They built a lot of pyramids and put a sphinx out there in the desert to mark the beginning of the zodiac. So what might that be? Probably what? Yes, Egypt. Then there was another one that conquered Egypt, and they did so because they invented, or discovered rather, a very strong metal to make swords and spears with, and that was not the metal now. The metal was iron, we know that. And it cut through the Egyptian copper very easily, which gave them a real advantage. Now, what was the second empire? Egypt, then what? Starts with an A. Assyria. Don't be afraid to try to answer it. I hear these little whispers. Let's speak up. Egypt, Assyria, then what? Sam? Yes, Babylonia. Very good. I notice you didn't say Babylon. Babylon was a city. Babylonia was the empire. So that's very good. Egypt, Assyria, Babylonia. Then, who conquered the Babylonians? Remember, they diverted the Euphrates River so they could get under the wall and take the city. And there was a king, Belshazzar, who saw the handwriting on the wall. Remember? So what nation was that came in and took over Babylon? Medo-Persia. And later on, the Medes and Persians pretty much united, didn't they? And it just became known as the Persian Empire. Then the Persian Empire fell to whom? To which empire? Remember those battles we studied last time? Or we just made mention of them, actually. See, I've got to check you out and see how much you've learned. Remember those battles? One of them involved a man, a runner, who came to bring news of the battle, and he ran a 20-mile run, and then he fell dead after he delivered the message. The Battle of... They still run races and call it by the same name. Battle of what? In 490 B.C. Marathon. Battle of Marathon. That's right, 490. That was one of the battles that led to the fall of the Persian Empire. Then what was another battle? Just a short time later. Actually, there were three more important ones, weren't there? Who remembers? After Marathon came what? Thermopylae, Salamis, and the last one, when the empire of Persia fell to the Greeks, was Arbela. You've got to work on this, okay, so you can answer these questions. Now, let's just back up a little bit, because I don't think it's really clear in your mind how all of this falls into place. So what we're going to do is go right back to the Tower of Babel. Now, this is an interesting chart, and I found out I can order these charts. It's a beautiful chart. Covers all the history of the world from creation to 1878, and it has the simultaneous happenings of Israel and of all the other peoples as they moved and migrated forward all the way down through history. And these charts are only $17.95. And they have a separate one just on Bible history. And that one, let's see, I've got the paper right here. That one I think is $8.95. But you can get both of them for $24.95. But this one really does the job because it has the Bible incorporated right along with the world history. So it's only $17.95. I'm mentioning that for those that get these tapes. If you want a chart like this, it's money well spent. It's amazing that it doesn't cost more. I'm really shocked. This thing is 16 feet long. So anyway, clear back to the Tower of Babel, and there are some things written on here about the Tower of Babel, and I'll just tell you about that. Oh, here's Noah's Ark over here. And it says here that it weighed 81,000 tons. That's quite a heavy boat, isn't it? But the Tower of Babel says about it that it was 8 stories high, about 650 feet high. That it actually was a temple of Jupiter. I knew that it probably was a ziggurat, an astrological observatory, because of course Nimrod was really the father of astrology. But what happened at the Tower of Babel? They tried to build this big tower that would reach unto heaven, and God did something to stop them. Now, what did he use? I think probably Jane knows the answer to that. How did the Lord stop the building of the Tower of Babel? What was that again? He changed their languages. He confounded the languages, and they couldn't understand each other. So they had to split off into small groups. Right? Very good. That's what happened at the Tower of Babel. So the Bible says they left off building the tower. Now, they were going to build a tower and a city. And their purpose was to have one people, all one world government. And that was not the will of God. God wanted people to be separated out. And he proved that time and again because he split the world apart, didn't he? Not only did the Tower of Babel come to an abrupt halt, but in the days of Peleg, remember, the earth was divided, and the continents broke off. The earth split apart into the continents, into separate pieces, and drifted away. So that the boundaries were set. God set the bounds of the habitations of the people, just like it tells us in Acts chapter 17. In fact, when the Apostle Paul was preaching on Mars Hill, he mentioned that very thing, didn't he? That God set the bounds of the habitations of all these different people. So if you go back to the Tower of Babel here, you find something real interesting on this chart. You've got various lines coming off. See these different, almost like highways. Very colorful, all coming off out of the Tower of Babel. The one way down here, you have the Chinese people branched off. And it tells the different dynasties, the first one. And they follow all the way along through history on this bottom line. Okay? Way down on the bottom, it's China. It takes it all the way back to the Tower of Babel. This line right here is Greece. Now, those are the people we're studying right now. The Grecian people, originally called the Attican people. Attica, or the Arcadian people. And one of their first deities that they worshipped was a god named Pan. And as there's an old poem about Pan, and he was known as the mountain goat of Arcadia. But anyway, so you have the Grecian people here in this line. It follows all the way through, and it splits off into several. Because God was dividing. See how divided it is toward the end? God was causing the people to be divided. All right, now, here's China, Greece, Babylon, Mizraim, or Egypt, is here. Now, I don't think you girls can see, can you? Because I'm standing right, I have to stand right here. You can't see what I'm pointing at. You should really come over here. If you want to grab a couple chairs, you can put them in the middle. I want you to see where I'm pointing. Okay? Come on. All right. Oh, it isn't that big of an effort, is it? I don't know. When I was a kid, everything was easy. It's when you get old when things get hard, right? Okay. Now, once again, got the Tower of Babel here. Now you've got the Phoenician people, or Canaan, the Canaanite people on this top line here, coming off from the Tower of Babel. You got the Egyptians here. You've got the Babylonians or Chaldeans here. The Grecian people here, the Chinese people here. But all people can be traced back to the Tower of Babel, can't they? That's where all the languages came from. That's where all the different ethnicity, different races came from, right back here. As everything moved forward, things began to change. Now, the sons of Noah, this is the biblical line is on the top. The top, 5 inches of this whole chart, the whole distance, is the biblical portion, taken from the Bible. Now, here you see Noah and his 3 sons, Japheth coming out this way, Shem, and Ham right here. Now we know that Ham and his children, Mizraim and Canaan, Nimrod, these people, went down toward Egypt, toward the African continent. Japheth went up toward the European area, up through the Caucasus Mountains, up in that area of the world. And Shem, some interesting things happened with Shem. Notice this looks like one highway becoming many here. The different sons. But here are some names that you will no doubt recognize. Terah, who gave birth to Haran. And here you have Abram and Lot. Here's Abram right here. So it began, these are all descendants of Shem. They became the Semitic, from Shem, the word Sem, the Semitic people. And as you go along here, see all this division? Why does this get so wide in here? Why do you think? One of the descendants, I should say, of Abraham had a whole bunch of children and 4 wives. Now who would that be? None other than, his name was changed, right? His name became Israel. What was his name? Come on now, let's not be brain dead. Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons and a daughter, and that's why these lines get all divided up here. This one becomes many. And as you move along, a lot of things happen. Now here you have the period of the judges. And there are all kinds of incidents on this chart. Here's Samuel the prophet. Here's the temple that Solomon built. Of course, you get right over in here and some other things begin to happen. The Babylonian captivity and so forth. But this was Israel's period of time. The tabernacle is on here. Here's Ruth. They have a picture of Ruth there. So the things you read about in the Bible, you can see on this chart and how they fit in elsewhere. So what was going on then in other parts of the world? Well, at the time when Abraham lived, you can go way down here to this Grecian line. The Greeks who lived in Macedonia, remember where Macedonia was on the map? You know where Greece is on the map. These people began to worship strange gods and goddesses. Jupiter, Poseidon, another name for him was Neptune, and Hades. In fact, the Greeks had primarily a 3-person godhead and then a whole bunch of lesser gods. They believed that there was a god named Zeus, or Jupiter. They called him Zeus. The Romans called him Jupiter. And they believed he was the god of heaven and earth. Then they had a separate god for the sea. They called him Poseidon. The Romans called him Neptune. Then they had another god for the underworld, the world of the dead. And that was Hades. Now, they had a lot of other gods and goddesses. They had messengers, and they also had a system where they believed that you could have a half-god, half-man type of thing, like Hercules. They had all these stories, and they're called myths, mythology, because that's just what they are. They're stories. These are not real gods and goddesses, but the Greeks made statues of them, built temples for them, and took it very seriously. In fact, when the Apostle Paul in Acts 17 spoke on Mars Hill, what did he tell the Greeks? He said they were too superstitious. They had all these gods and goddesses, and he stood in front of, they even had one set up in case they missed one. They had so many gods and goddesses, they thought, well, we got all these, what if we missed one? Then that one will be mad at us, and we got trouble. So they built a big shrine to the unknown God, the one we don't know about. What a perfect place for the Apostle Paul to stand right in front of that, because he was going to tell them about the one they didn't know about. And he proceeded to do just that. But he told them they were too superstitious, all these gods and goddesses in here. Now, as time went on, you go down this chart, and here you have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. What's going on in Greece? Well, they're worshiping these gods and goddesses, okay? And they are a fragmented people. It's not one country. When I say Greece, I'm referring to a land and a people, but they branched off into separate cities. And even that is shown on the chart. The Grecian people split up. You have, for an example, let me get these lines straight here. Right here it begins to branch off. This line is Athens. Then you have Sparta, and you have Thebes. These are called city-states. Now, what do you think it means by city-state? A city is a city, a state is a state. What's a city-state? A separate governing unit, a city that's also a nation, or declares itself to be such, independent from all else. And in the land of Greece, the Spartans had contention against the Athenians, and they would fight back and forth, as well as with Thebes. And another incident, remember I talked about the Trojan horse last Sunday? Was that Sunday? Yeah, that's right. Time goes so fast. But anyway, I talked about the Trojan horse because there was a king named Priam, the king of Troas, or Troy. And he had a son named Paris, and Paris fell in love with a Grecian woman, an Athenian woman named Helen. And Paris went over and kidnapped her, took her back to Troy, or Troas. As a result, a Greek army went to rescue her, and they fought the Trojan War. Well, I guess you could say Trojan Wars. There were quite a number of battles fought. Does anybody here remember how they actually finally beat the Trojans? Remember, Troy was in Asia Minor, or Turkey. So they crossed over the sea, and they won the Trojan War. How did they win the Trojan War? They built something, didn't they? Who wants to speak up and tell me how they did it? Jane? Yes, they built a big wooden horse, put it on wheels, a big wooden horse, and filled it with soldiers. Then as they were leaving, it looked like they were vacating. They got in their ships and they left, and they sent this little message to Troy saying, here's a little peace offering, we're leaving, we give up. Have this nice wooden horse as a memento, see? So they opened the gates, they all got a hold of the ropes and pulled the wooden horse into the city. As soon as they got in the city, they opened the belly of the horse, and all these Greek soldiers jumped out and started slaughtering the whole mess, and they took the city. It was a big horse. As a matter of fact, I think that is shown on I believe they built it on location. Yeah, but I believe it's shown on the chart here, if I can spot it very quickly. Let's see. Yeah, right here. Now you can't see it because it's kind of small from where you are. You won't, but it's right here. Here's the Trojan horse. So at the time of the Battle of Troy, or Troas, really is the way the Bible says it, what was going on elsewhere? Okay, at this very same time, you have a man way up here. Well, here's Ruth, who lived at the time of the Trojan War. Okay. Here you have Boaz, Obed, and Jesse, who lived around the time of the Trojan War. And who was one of the sons of Jesse that became pretty well known? It was David, wasn't it? So David lived just after the Trojan War. See, doesn't it kind of help to know what's going on elsewhere in the world? You can even look down the chart and find out what's going on in China, okay, at this very same time, because this is a comparative study here. So you've got this people of Greece, these different strains. Now during this time, they different strains of thought, I should say. They're all the same basic race of people. But they had disagreements, and the Greeks worshipped something within themselves. I think I touched on that, didn't I? They worshipped something that was in them. Do you remember what that was? They called it the Ein Sof. It was wisdom. They believed if they had wisdom, that was divinity. That was they made them a god. There was a little spark of God in them called wisdom. And the wiser they were, the more of God they had. Remember how Paul talked about how the Greeks worshipped wisdom and so forth? And it was not the wisdom from God. But he said, James said there was a wisdom that was earthly and sensual and devilish. And see, that's what they had. The Greeks had a lot of philosophers. Remember the word philosophy? Philosophy? Who can tell me what that word, philosophia, means? Philosophy. Philo is a word for love. Sophia, some would say Sophia, is wisdom. The love of wisdom, philosophy, philosophia, the love of wisdom. And they had a lot of notable men like Socrates and later on Aristotle, men like that came up with tremendous thoughts, interesting thoughts, thought-provoking thoughts, things that would bring a lot of question marks to people's minds and make them really think hard. Don't you love to think real hard? Now, what kind of things did they talk about? Well, they would sit down. These Greeks didn't have anything better to do, so they'd all sit around, and they would talk about, okay, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The chicken or the egg? So all these men would sit there, well, you know, you got to have an egg to get a chicken, right? But then again, you've got to have a chicken to get an egg. So, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Of course, we know the answer to that is very simple, isn't it? You got to have 2 chickens to get an egg, right? But they really puzzled over things like that. Here's another one they thought up. And by the way, they still teach this in the university today. If there's a tree in the woods and it falls down to the ground, but nobody's around anywhere to hear it, did it make a noise? Now you might say, well, of course, every time a tree, you can chop 1,000 trees down. Every one that falls, it makes a noise, doesn't it? But they say, if there was no ear to hear a noise, how could there be a noise? How could you prove it made a noise if no ear was there to hear it? Maybe that was the one exception that didn't make a noise. Now, these guys would sit around and puzzle over this stuff. Now, does anybody know the answer to that for sure? Now, you can argue with these professors, and they'll tell you all day long, you can't prove that tree made a noise because no ear was there to hear it. So how can you truthfully say it did? You can't base it on 1,000 other trees that did make a noise. This one fell and nobody heard it. So, did it make a noise? And they'll argue all day long with you on that one. Well, that's just it. Why do they care? Well, for the same reason the Greeks cared. It was their religion. Wisdom. Can I trip somebody up? Can I bring something up that's beyond their thinking and yet is still solvable? Oh, really? Is this solvable? How about that one? Sure it is. You have to define what noise is. If you can define what noise is, then you can answer the question. What is noise? If noise are sound waves caused by a motion through the air causing a reverberation effect, and it's picked up by an ear, if that's noise, fine. Then you can say, well, if there was no ear to hear it, it didn't make a noise because you're talking about the detector. It was absent, okay? If that's how you're going to define noise. But if you're going to define noise as an object moving through the air, causing sound waves, whether your ear picks it up or not, just the act of something moving through air, then sure it made a noise. Because you didn't need an ear to tell you that it made a noise. You know from the motion through the air that it did. You have to define it. Here's another favorite one that the Greeks like to use. And, of course, Socrates got in trouble. Remember how Socrates got in trouble? This man of great wisdom. Through studying and through careful thought and contemplation, he taught that there was only one God. Socrates. That meant there couldn't be a Zeus and a Poseidon and a Hades and an Apollo and an Asclepius and all these other different gods and goddesses. Socrates said there's only one. One God. He figured that out. You know what they did with him? They killed the guy. Because you can't have that kind of thought that there's one God, see? That'd mess up the whole religious system. So they sentenced him to death by drinking hemlock, which is a deadly poison. And he did that. But one of the things that, they'd sit down with Socrates and they'd try to argue with him. One of the things they came up with, okay, there's one God, according to what you say. So, he's one God, he's almighty. Now, can God create something that he himself cannot move? This is how the Greeks would talk. Can God create something that he himself cannot move? If you say no, then how can he be almighty? There's something he can't do. If you say yes, he can create something he can't move, why can't he move it? He's still not almighty. That's the way the Greeks talk. By the way, you know who else talks that way? University professors. Same thing. Where'd they get all their ideas from? Way back here. They studied philosophy. That's how they come up with all that crazy stuff. In fact, another thing, I'll deal with that one in a minute if you remind me. I'll give you the answer to that one. But they came up with another train of thought. Toot toot, train of thought. It's actually called existentialism. Existentialism teaches, and some of the Greeks believe this, that you don't really exist. You only think you do. Nowadays they call it the Christian Science religion. But you don't exist. And if you fall down, the reason you hit the floor is you're thinking about hitting the floor. If you didn't think you were going to hit the floor, you wouldn't hit the floor. See? That none of this is real. It's all just in your mind. It's just all a concept. It's all a thought. Nobody else exists. Nothing exists. You can't even prove your own existence, they'll tell you. You can't prove you exist. And you get that in Philosophy 101. Yeah, you might say, yeah, it does sound stupid. It is. It really is. Because if you come up, I'll tell you how to disprove existentialism. If you come up behind somebody with a big hat pin and you stab them in the gluteus maximus, the big muscle back here, with that hat pin, if they didn't know you were behind them, and they didn't know and you surprised them, then why did they jump? Why did they holler? They weren't thinking about a hat pin stabbing them in the posterior, but they jumped anyway. Okay, so it's pretty easy to disprove, you know. Okay, back to this other thing now. Can God create something he himself cannot move? Listen to the question. Can you do something you can't do? You're taking a positive and a negative and putting it within the same context of one thing. It's not a valid question, is it? If I take all the extras out of it and I just would look at you, Sam, I would say, can you do something you can't do? Stupid question, right? Can God create something he can't move? Dumb question. But they would ponder over this, and people, oh, wow, what a question. And see, it's just stupidity. Of course, nobody can do something they can't do. All right? But besides, there is no negative with God, so you can't put a negative in anything with him. Everything is yea and amen. He can create anything and move anything. Okay? But you can't pit one against the other. It isn't a valid question in any sense. So, that's the kind of things that these Greeks discussed, and they had different philosophies. They had Epicureans who believed that the way to total happiness is to never deny yourself anything. You know, if eating 10 pounds of chocolate makes you happy, go ahead and do it. If getting drunk all the time makes you happy, go ahead and do it. The way to happiness is never say no to yourself. Okay? And Stoicism, the Stoics, basically taught that the way to happiness is always say no to yourself. Never let yourself have anything you want. You know, if you feel like drinking a Dr. Pepper, say no. If you feel like eating a certain something, always deprive yourself. Always get the kind you don't like. Always eat and drink things you can't stand. Always do what you don't want to do and never do what you want to do. And then they say you will find you will be on the road to happiness and eventually you will be ecstatic. Did you know that word ecstasy comes from the Greek language? Ecstatic. You ever see these pictures of the Greeks? They were obsessed with nakedness. They wore almost nothing. And they had public baths and all this kind of stuff, and you had all these muscle apes running around naked all the time. The Greek word for, and by the way, heathenism, one of the things that will, what shall I say? One of the things that reveals how heathen something is nakedness, the lack of clothes. The more heathen people get, the fewer clothes they wear, which kind of tells you something about people today, doesn't it? Okay? The Roman pictures that were drawn, they had all these statues, nothing but a fig leaf on, and sometimes not that. But the word ecstatic literally means to stand forth naked. So if somebody says, oh, I was just ecstatic. Oh, really? Huh? Ecstasy was supposed to be the feeling that you got from standing forth naked in public. That's what the Greeks believed. That produced a feeling of ecstasy. All right? So, now that's the way the Greeks were. Now, anyway, a few little giggles here and there. Okay. But if you check that word out, etymologically, you'll find that it does mean to stand forth naked. Ecstatic or ecstasy being the condition of it. Okay. All right, settle down now. Now, all along this line, you've got the Grecian people right along here. Here's where they're dividing up into the Athenians fighting the Spartans. Does anybody here know anything did you do any reading on your own or studying about the Athenians or Spartans? Anybody have any information that you want to pass along? Ruth?
Well, it says that the Spartans placed even more emphasis on athletic prowess, and they were extremely warlike people. Even coffee Spartans now, supply vigorous disciplines in themselves with lifestyle.
Yeah, the Spartan people were very aggressive. They very much take charge and wanted to dominate and be superior. That's correct. The Athenians were a little more passive. They were very competitive, but they didn't have that, how could we compare it? You might say these Spartans were like a bunch of Marines, leathernecks, go get 'em type, gung-ho type of people. Whereas the Athenians were more head knowledge, more mental prowess. So the Spartans were more muscle apes, you might say, and stressed the physical, where the Athenians, even though they did stress the importance of a good physique, and they worked out and everything, they believed the power was really in the mind. So they really stressed that. But they had battles, they fought, they had great struggles back and forth. And then remember, we went all the way up. I hope this review is helping you. Okay. We went all the way up to where the Grecian people began to get together. Now here you still have Sparta here, but it's starting to mesh now as we come together. Right here, let me just follow this timeline for you. See this golden head here on the chart? It's Nebuchadnezzar. Right back here you have the Assyrian Empire. Okay? This little loop right in here. Assyria, Babylon right in here. And this green square, large green square, is that Persian Empire. Darius, Cyrus, Artaxerxes, these various kings ruled in this period of time. And we were talking a little while ago, remember I asked you about the battles? Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, Arbela. Way down in this area here, at the end of this green section, you have these battles mentioned. And a king, I guess you can't say a king, he sort of was, but a general, Alexander the Great. And I want to correct something I mentioned, I think last time or the time before. He was a very young king. I think I mentioned he took the, I call him a king. Historians would say, well, he was a general. But he ruled the world militarily for a while. Well, okay, we'll call him a general just for the sake of, we're looking at armies right now. But Alexander the Great took control when he was 20 years old. His army was a unified army of all the Grecian people, and he swept through the world like a whirlwind. 13 years. That's kind of profound, isn't it? He ruled militarily for a period of 13 13 years. That number 13 comes up time and time again in history. When he died at the age of 33, after a 13-year reign, in that time he conquered the whole known world. Remember, the Bible said his kingdom was like what? What beast? Remember the 4 beasts in Daniel 7? They came out of the Mediterranean Sea, the Great Sea. The first empire was Babylon, then Medo-Persia. Babylon was what? The lion with the wings. Medo-Persia was the bear with the 3 ribs in his mouth. Then came what? The Grecian Empire, represented by another kind of cat. Come on. A very fast-moving cat with 4 heads and 4 wings. A leopard. A leopard. 4 heads and 4 wings. When Alexander died, what happened? His 4 generals took over. Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. And they divided the empire up. And that's what you have right in this area in here. See this section right here? Here's the Persian Empire. Here's Alexander the Great on his horse. And when he died, his 4 generals took over. And you had all these divisions. Now there was another nation forming way down here called Rome. And as you can see, Rome, this big area here, we're going to be spending 2 or 3 weeks on Rome, talking about the Roman Empire, conquered even a greater part of the world than had ever been conquered before. So Rome starts way down in this corner. See where the kind of a pinkish color starts here and gets wider and wider and wider, this whole section, and then finally it's fragmented and goes off out this way. Any questions so far about anything we talked about? Time goes so fast. Got about 10 minutes left. Oh, with Alexander the Great? Okay. Yeah, you need to ask questions like this. That's good. I want you, all of you students, to ask questions like that. I want to know that you're thinking. Okay, Alexander the Great, you've got his horse right here. So, here, let me just get right up close to the chart. Okay, you got Alexander the Great there. So if you go up here, you have... let's see. A temple for Diana, the 3rd wonder of the world, is built right near that time, just before that time, actually. And right in here, you got all these wonders of the world being built. Of course, the people of Israel, let's see, this is between the Testaments right now, okay? You're right in between the Old and the New Testament in this area, because back here, here's the kings, here's Zerubbabel, you remember Zerubbabel. Then you had an Eliakim, Zadok, see, here's Jesus here. So you're between the Testaments in this area. Yeah, the 400 silent years were during the time of Alexander. Because, see, Alexander was, see if it gives the exact date here. I think it was 331 BC. 331 BC when he actually came to power. So you're right between the Testaments in that period of time. And, of course, the Roman Empire didn't come forth yet. Between the Testaments, the Old and New Testaments, the Grecian Empire was in full swing. You had all kinds of things going on. Another empire was rising up, the Roman Empire. And I'm not even going to start Rome because I want to really spend some time on that. And I want to show you how just about everything going on today can be traced back to Rome. Particularly things in the United States. The things that people do, the way that they think. This is a Roman nation. Okay? In religion, really, and as a matter of fact, here's a prime example. How many people, and not just worldly people, how many Christian people get involved with what they call St. Valentine's Day? A lot of people do. The florists love it. The candy makers love it. Hallmark loves it. But what is it really? If you want to really, it's idolatry, and God hates idolatry. How many churches have people get together, they have singles banquets and so forth, or young couples banquets, because they encourage that sort of thing. It's really stupidity, isn't it? It's really ignorance, because it was called St. Valentine's Day by the Romans, the Catholics. The ancient Romans, before Catholicism came along, called it Lupercalia, the day of the wolf. And it was a day of immorality and of great license. They did some awful, awful things on Lupercalia, the day of the wolf. When the Catholic system came in, they let people have the same holidays, they just renamed them. And so they call it St. Valentine's Day. And there's a lot more to that, but I won't take the time to go into it right now. So what people do in all their customs, in their holidays, in their expressions, in their mannerisms, even the language. You know, the English language that we use in America has a very dominant Latin base to it. It's a mixture of a lot of other things. It's actually I guess you could say is a beast language. If you look in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, it talks about another beast. It's part leopard, it's part lion, and well, we could actually read it, but it's a composite. And of course, the language in the United States is a composite language. It isn't really true English, it's a mixture. So we'll come back to some of this later. Are there any other questions now, so we can see we were between the Testaments and Alexander the Great was romping around the world? Okay. The Grecian Empire, of course, was fragmented, divide and conquer. The four generals, you got four generals each taking a piece of the pie. They're all going to be arguing between each other anyway. Whenever you've got more than one trying to do something, you're going to have trouble. They always say the best way to kill any project is form a committee. That'll kill it right there. Okay? But anyway, so you've got these four generals. They each took a different piece of the world. I guess an example would be the Ptolemies. Remember, one of the generals was Ptolemy. They went down into Egypt. You have the Egyptian Ptolemies in 323 to 30 BC. They lasted 293 years. Okay. Syria, and the area around the country of Syria, was that of Seleucus. The Seleucids took that area. And let's see, down here you have Lysimachus going to Pergamos and Greece itself, Macedon, Bithynia. And so what's happening here is you've got a divided kingdom. Because it was divided, the Roman Empire was able to come forth as Julius Caesar, little by little, began to whittle away at these four kingdoms. Julius Caesar, of course, was the one that really got things rolling, didn't he? But that's under the Roman Empire. We won't really talk about that too much now. I will tell you this much. The reason our calendar is so messed up Why don't we just have equal number of days every month? The reason our calendar's messed up is because of the Caesars, really. The old calendar was called the Julian calendar. Later on it was revised by Pope Gregory and called the Gregorian calendar. That's basically what we've got now. All the days of the week are named after gods and goddesses. The month comes from the word moon, month, or month. One moon. But the cycle of the moon is 28 days. The first month of the year in the old Julian calendar was March. Would you like to have a good look at how the calendar used to be next time? Maybe we can do that. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see if they'll give us a complete breakdown on here. Okay, the Seleucid dynasties took Syria. The Ptolemies took Egypt. Let's move down here. I believe he went into the Hellespont, Bosporus, the Turkish area. Yeah. Okay. Another thing about our calendar, the reason that it's so strange is that when Julius Caesar gained control, of course he died on the Ides of March, killed by a conspiracy. But before he did that, he took a day off from February. He just robbed the day from February and put it on to July, which he named in his honor. July stands for Julius Caesar. So July had 31 days instead of 30. And then when Octavius took over, see, when Julius Caesar was killed, the three men that ended up in charge were Octavius Caesar. Octavius, I believe, was a nephew. Octavius and Lepidus, the general, and Mark Antony, who later on got involved with Cleopatra and finished off Egypt. But anyway, when Octavius took over, another name for Octavius was Augustus. And so he gave the calendar the month August, named after himself. Not wanting to be outdone by Julius, who had an extra day in July, he took another day off February and put it at the end of August in honor of his own name. So to this day, you've got July and August with 31 days, and February stuck with 28. Except that we figured through our timing mechanisms that it's not exact, and every 4 years you have to tack a day on for leap year. But that's how you got July and August ending up with 31. These two Caesars robbed the day off from February and stuck it on the end of those 2 months. Okay? We are out of time. If you have any more questions. I don't know if you learned anything or not tonight. It was mostly review. Maybe you picked up a couple little things here. No questions? Okay, then we'll consider the class dismissed. Now, just a minute. Okay, next time we do this, I want you to be able to answer a lot more questions, okay? And I think what I'm going to do is dive into the Roman Empire next time, full strength here. Now you might, one thing, don't leave yet. You might be wondering, hey, why didn't you cover the Grecian mythology? Well, probably because the Roman mythology was identical. Only the names were changed to protect the guilty. But I'll get into that a little more under the Roman thing, okay? All right, now you can go.